Livid back today with a little bit of a different video for Remnant from the Ashes. Today, I wanted to take a step back after months of enjoyment with this game and reflect on what could possibly be improved or added to the game down the road. Keep in mind, all of these are purely suggestions based on my time with the game so far, and regardless if these happen down the road or not, we should all congratulate Gunfire Games on releasing such a fantastic game that has been more complete than a lot of games at launch in recent history. So with that, let's jump right into it. My first major suggestion would be to have some form of material conversion. I don't know about anyone else, but over the course of time, hardened iron has become incredibly common, while galvanized iron has easily become the most sought after upgrade resource. Even when going to Ash to buy resources every so often, the most I've ever seen her hold was like 22 for sale, which at times can barely upgrade a piece of armor twice. Now, my honest suggestion is for one of two things. Either for the developers to have the game do a check to see what resources you are lowest on or currently need for available upgrades, and have the world generate drops based on that. The other option would possibly allow Ash to have a second inventory tab that allows you to sell X amount of one resource for Y amount of another. This would give us a great place to spend all the extra iron, forged iron, and hardened iron, and allow us to make progress consistently on upgrades throughout the whole game. Now, I also do a lot of build videos with these upgrades, since I like exploring the different stats and combinations of the items in the game. Something I would absolutely love going forward would be an addition to Ward 13 that adds a shooting range. I would absolutely love an area that allows us to test our weapons and builds against static targets that don't die. If we had targets that represented minor enemies, major enemies, and bosses, it would give an excellent testing ground to quickly see if that build you theory crafted is working. If damaging these targets generated mod power, and an ammo crate was nearby for restocking, this would be an amazing place to test builds, especially with more armor, weapons, and mods likely coming down the line in the future. It would even be really cool to have a couple of loadout tabs to allow us to save our favorite builds for quick swapping as the amount of items in the game increases over time. Now, another thing I personally would find incredibly awesome would be a main lore compendium for Remnant. As we find books, journals, computer terminals, and more throughout the world, seeing them turned into collectibles that we could revisit in an organized location to read through at a later date would be amazing. I'm a huge lore buff in all games that I play, and if I wasn't holding up my friends 90% of the time that I was playing through Remnant or other games, I would sit there and read each piece completely every time. Having these saved, I think, would be a neat and valuable addition to the community as a whole. Something else I'd like to talk about was introduced to players that originally pre-ordered the game, and we really haven't seen much on them since then. These were alternate skins for the starting 3 class armors in the game. I would absolutely love to see this expanded on for all other armors, and maybe even weapons down the road. Customization is something I know a lot of people value in most games to make their characters really feel more unique, and giving players the option to stand out from their friends or other players they meet online would be awesome. I would highly recommend, however, that if implementing this, a decent portion of these should be tied to in-game achievements, like boss kills, no death runs, kill streaks without damage, and so on, to make these more desirable within the community. Maybe even tie some of these to community events for logging in during certain time frames. Now, I know probably some of us aren't going to object to paying for some of these that they make, and that's perfectly fine, but as long as a decent portion of these make their way in through achievable options, I think the community would be happy. Now, while we're on the topic of cosmetics to a degree, I'm sure the entire community is in agreement that alternate looks or even straight up hiding our backpack is a feature we all would love. These could be achievable unlocks that let us make that backpack look like our other styles of armor, for an even more cohesive experience. Now, I do understand though that making that many new models could very well be a time-consuming endeavor, but I still wanted to highlight it just in case. Now, if we jump back on over to gameplay, melee builds and gameplay is something I know a good portion of the community would love to play around with more, even though I know the design philosophy for Remnant is to embrace guns over melee. Now, I think we are at a point that allows for some more in-depth melee options would be quite a new experience to the game and further expand on the build options within this game. Even something like a melee weapon that would allow you to maybe throw it out and either it returns to you or you pull it back in would be an awesome tool to play around with, and potentially enable a full-on only melee run against any boss in the game. Even if that means potentially implementing new melee-based mods to slot into weapons that don't have innate abilities. Now, I'm not going to mention more story content, weapons, or mods, because it's very clear that the team over at Gunfire Games are hard at work on more content for this game, and they even have a roadmap laid out. Now, there are two concepts, however, that I would like to mention purely as suggestions, as a couple friends and I have talked about them thoroughly and would genuinely like to see what the community thinks about them. Now, the first one I want to discuss is the idea of a Horde Mode or Endless style enemy mode. Imagine you and two friends load into an area, maybe Dreamer related to make it more plausible lore-wise. The area around them could shift into different variants of the current tile sets that we have, as well as the units. Your characters would start out completely fresh, and as your team completed waves of enemies, you could go for trait point unlocks or upgrades to gear, with every boss wave possibly awarding weapons or further gear upgrades. Now, the whole objective would just be to survive as many waves as you possibly could. If this was the case, they could put compound items like emotes, new gear, and even cosmetic skins as unlocks for every so many waves beaten. I think the main thing lacking from the game right now is a piece of content that is really highly replayable with friends, as once you get to endgame and pretty much have tapped out on upgrades, you quickly run out of things to repeat. Something like this could be an easy place for them to add more tile sets, enemies, items, and more as they add things to other parts of the game. So what do y'all think about this sort of idea? I would honestly love to hear your thoughts on something like this down below. Now, the second idea, and last for this whole video, may be a very controversial one to suggest, which is the whole reason I'm leaving it till the end. As someone who immensely enjoys the PvE experience in all games from RPGs to MMOs, I'd be lying if I said I didn't also enjoy sometimes the PvP side of things. Now, before the pitchforks and torches are raised, just hear me out here. How many times have you played with friends and engaged in just shooting at each other and seeing which one of your friends ends up being the last person standing? The combat when fighting around each other, even if it isn't intended, actually feels surprisingly good. And if you take a look at certain tile sets in Remnant, such as the village area on Ram, the multi-level areas on Yeisha, and even some areas on Earth, they would lend themselves so well to smaller PvP style arenas. If we also look back at things like Dark Souls, a clear inspiration for this game, even that had PvP in the form of invading other players' worlds. Now, there is a reason this is at the very end of the list for me, and that is because I would rather see all of the other ideas I mentioned implemented way before something like this. But it really makes me wonder if something like a PvP area, based around other players being nightmares or something, might actually fit well in this game. Just some food for thought here, and another I'd love to hear your opinions on. And well, that's it for my thoughts and some improvements or additions I'd love to see in the future of Remnant. This game is easily in my top 5 of the past few years of games, and I'd love nothing more than to see it constantly expand upon and grow into something even more than what it is now. I hope you all enjoyed this little critique and would once again love to hear your feedback down below and your thoughts on the current state of the game. And I want to say thanks for dropping by, everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.